A brand new house built with effort and filled with dreams, a space that should have been the start of something beautiful, simple, and full of life. But what if something begins to feel different? When what is familiar carries an unexplainable sense of unease. Have you ever had the feeling that something, however small, isn't where it should be? This is one of those stories, a tale that from the very first bricks to the secrets hidden in the walls reveals much more than just a home under construction. Good evening, Dom. I decided to share this account because it represents a crucial period in my life, when everything seemed to conspire against something as simple as our wish to live in peace. My name is Ronaldo, I'm 30 years old and I lead a simple life. I'm one of those people who faces exhausting workdays yet still finds reasons to smile alongside my family when I get home. I don't have great possessions or luxury items to show off, but honestly, I've never felt I was lacking anything. A few years ago, my father-in-law, Claudio, gave us a plot of land on the outskirts of the village. It was a gesture I'll never be able to repay in full. The neighborhood, truth be told, was somewhat neglected, with dirt roads that turned into a complete mess when it rained. Still, for us, that piece of land was the starting point for something we had always dreamed of, a home of our own. My wife Carla and I began to build with the little we had. She sold used clothes sent by relatives from the United States. It wasn't a profitable business, but it always helped with weekly expenses. I worked as a middleman between rural producers and coconut exporters. It was tough work, full of people trying to take advantage of those stuck in the middle, but over time I learned how to manage. Every penny we earned was treated like a treasure. We did it not for ourselves, but for our children. We had 3, a girl and 2 boys. For many years we lived with Carla's parents. I never had a reason to complain about them. They were always generous and caring, both with us and the kids. But I dreamed of having a space that was ours, a place where I could replace a light bulb without asking permission or decide on my own where to hang a picture. Carla shared that dream. At night, we would talk about what our house would be like. She wanted large windows to fill the space with light, and I wanted a backyard where the kids could play freely. It was a simple wish, but it was ours alone. After a full day of work, I would still stop by the construction site to help the bricklayers. I arrived exhausted, with the smell of coconut clinging to my hands and my feet heavy from walking so much. But seeing the house's foundations being raised renewed my energy. I learned from the bricklayers how to mix cement, carry blocks, and lay bricks. It wasn't my field, but it made me feel part of the building process, as if each wall erected brought us one step closer to our dream. In the beginning, we had little interaction with our neighbors, just discreet waves or a passing smile. They seemed friendly but reserved, just like us. Sometimes I had to knock on someone's door to borrow a missing tool, a hammer, a drill. It was inevitable. Over time, I noticed something strange. People talked about us in a peculiar way. They weren't our closest neighbors, but those who lived farther away, who watched us from a distance. They said we were closed off, that we didn't socialize, that we thought we were better than everyone else. It confused me. Carla and I barely had time for ourselves, let alone to socialize. Our focus was on work and the house. Even so, some people's glances seemed to carry a silent expectation, as if they were waiting for something to go wrong. Carla and I decided we would only move in once the house was completely finished. We insisted on taking care of every detail slowly and carefully. One of the biggest milestones was completing the wall around the property. It gave us not only privacy but also security, allowing the children to play in the backyard without worry. When we finally settled in, the house stood out in the neighborhood. It didn't seem out of place, but it was different, bigger, with wide windows and the wall surrounding it. My father-in-law, upon seeing it finished, joked that it looked like a gated community house. The first few months were peaceful. We organized our belongings, got used to the new space, and established a routine. We greeted our neighbors when we passed them on the street, and some even welcomed us. "Your house looks beautiful," commented a woman while sweeping in front of hers. Carla and I thanked her with a smile, but it didn't go beyond that. We weren't close to our neighbors, but we made a point of being polite. Over time, however, small frictions arose. The first was with a neighbor who loved playing music at a very high volume. At first, I tried to let it slide, I thought they were occasional parties, but it soon became clear that it was a habit, especially on weekends. The music would start in the afternoon and continue until dawn. Some nights the kids couldn't even sleep, and that really irritated me. On one of those nights, close to midnight, I went to the backyard trying to clear my head. The noise was so loud that it felt like it was inside my house. Carla, always calm, asked me not to intervene. "They're just parties. It's not worth causing trouble," she said. I tried to follow her advice, but it was hard to ignore my frustration. Another incident happened a few weeks later. I parked my truck in front of a neighbor's house while arranging some things in the yard. I thought it wouldn't be a problem since it would be quick. But the man came to my door, clearly bothered. "Can you move your truck? It's in front of my house." He said it without a greeting. The tone wasn't exactly rude, but it wasn't friendly either. I apologized and moved the vehicle immediately. "I thought it wouldn't bother you," I said calmly, but he turned his back and went inside without another word. I avoided confrontations and knew it wasn't worth insisting on arguments. Carla, trying to reassure me, would say, "As long as we're fine in here, nothing else matters." Even so, I felt that for some reason, we didn't quite fit into the neighborhood. The children, on the other hand, adapted quickly to the new school and loved playing in the backyard. Carla focused on decorating the house, taking care of every detail with items she made herself. We tried to keep the focus on our family, our home, and our routine, leaving everything else in the background. One random morning as I was heading to work, I found the white gate of the house vandalized with spray paint. It was a careless graffiti, shapeless and purposeless, covering most of the front. I stood there staring at those marks, filled with a mix of shock and anger. That gate was one of the details that had most delighted us when we finished the house. We chose it because it provided a clean, modern look, and now it was completely ruined. The fresh paint glistened under the sun, and my annoyance grew with every glance. Carla came after me, noticed the state of the gate, and asked who I thought might have done it. I already had my suspicions. A young man who lived a few houses ahead came to mind. I often saw him spraying paint on abandoned walls and neglected areas. He always had a backpack and walked around with a group of friends. Although I had no concrete proof, my instincts pointed to him. I took a deep breath, trying not to act on impulse. I spent the morning trying to clean the gate, but the paint marks wouldn't come off completely. I decided I needed something more practical and permanent, so I installed a security camera. I placed it discreetly out of sight, but with a clear view of the gate and the front entrance. The following weeks went by without incident, and things returned to normal. Even so, I couldn't help but occasionally check the recordings, looking for any sign of trouble. For a while, everything seemed fine, until one morning I found the gate sprayed again. This time the drawing was bigger, more colorful, and much more elaborate, as if the culprit had all the time in the world to work. The anger came flooding back. I went straight to the camera recordings without saying a word. As I suspected, my initial guess was confirmed. Though the face wasn't clear, his walk, his body shape, and the backpack were unmistakable. It was the same young man I had suspected from the start. I decided it was time to talk to him. I didn't know his name or many details, but I knew where he lived. That same day, after work, I walked over to his house. It was a simple construction, with peeling walls and a rusty metal door that looked abandoned. I knocked twice and waited. The door opened slowly, but it wasn't him who appeared. Instead, a woman who looked to be in her early 30s stood there. She wore an apron, and her hair was tied back. "Good afternoon," I greeted her, trying to keep my tone under control. "By any chance, are you the mother of the young man who lives here?" She gave me an indecipherable look, followed by a brief pause. She replied in a curt tone, "I'm not his mother, I'm his girlfriend." I was surprised by her response, but said nothing about it. I went straight to the point. "I found my gate vandalized with spray paint this morning. It's the second time it's happened. I checked my security camera footage and clearly saw that it was him who did it. I'm not here to cause trouble, but this needs to stop." Her gaze hardened, and her expression grew increasingly irritated. "You're mistaken," she said, folding her arms. "He wouldn't do something like that." "I'm not mistaken," I insisted firmly without raising my voice. "I saw it in the footage. I don't want to start a fight, but I need to talk to him to clear this up." She maintained her rigid posture, looking at me as if drawing an invisible line. Finally, she said he wasn't home and she didn't know when he'd be back. Her voice was sharp, and the discomfort in the air was almost tangible. "All right, just tell him I'd like to talk," I replied. Without saying another word to me, she slowly closed the door, as though placing a final period on the conversation. Later that night after dinner, I tried to relax. The kids were busy in their room, Carla was washing dishes, and I was checking some messages on my phone. Still, I couldn't shake the unease that the day's events had left in me. Suddenly, a dull sound interrupted the calm of the house. I froze, trying to figure out what it was. The noise repeated, louder and more insistent, followed by others, as if stones were being thrown at the gate. I got up immediately, my heart pounding, and heard the children's frightened voices coming from their room. Carla came out of the kitchen, holding Paolo in her arms, her eyes full of concern. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice a mix of fear and confusion. Without replying, I walked to the door, the blows still echoing outside. Before opening it, I took out my phone and accessed the security camera. The image made me freeze. It was him, the same young man, now more aggressive, with a rock in his hand and fury burning in his eyes. Without thinking, I opened the door and stepped outside. "Good evening," I said, trying to sound calm, even though alarm bells were ringing inside me. He glared at me, his eyes blazing with rage, breathing heavily as if he were on the verge of exploding. "Who do you think you are?" he spat, pointing at me with one hand while holding the rock in the other. "Who do you think you are to accuse me of something I didn't do?" "I'm not accusing you without reason," I replied, keeping my distance. "I saw the footage. I just want to talk and understand what's happening." He erupted in shouts, his voice overflowing with resentment. "Understand what? You came here to humiliate me, to embarrass me? Just because you have money, you think you can step on people who have nothing? You think that house of yours makes you better than us?" I raised my hands, trying to calm him down. "That's not true. I'm not here to humiliate anyone. I just want to resolve this without trouble." "Shut up," he screamed, taking a step toward me. "You and that house of yours are the problem. You showed up here thinking you can boss people around, thinking you're better than everyone. Why don't you just go away?" His aggressive tone put me on high alert. The rage seemed to spill over, leaving no room for reason. "I don't want to argue. We just need to find a solution," I insisted, my voice firm but calm. "You shouldn't be here," he shouted again, lifting the rock as if about to throw it. "That house just gets in the way." I realized there was no longer room for conversation when he stepped forward and pushed me hard. I didn't fall, but I stumbled backward. That was enough to understand he wasn't willing to talk. Without another word, I turned around and went back inside, shutting the door behind me. As soon as the door was locked, the rocks began to hit the gate with force. Each impact made the walls vibrate, the sound echoing through the house as a constant reminder of the tension outside. Inside, the sound of the rocks was muffled by the children's cries. Paolo wouldn't stop crying, and the other two clung to Carla, terrified. She did her best to soothe them, but her eyes showed the same despair I felt. My hands shook as I picked up the phone and called a close friend who worked at the local police station, someone I trusted. I explained the situation briefly. He promised to send a patrol car right away. The blows against the gate didn't stop. Each impact sounded louder than the last, as though trying to break through both physical and psychological barriers. Carla kept looking at me anxiously while holding the kids close, and I felt torn. I wanted to confront the situation, but I feared what it might do to my family. Finally, the blue lights of the patrol car lit up the street. Through the window, I saw two officers approach the young man. He resisted at first, yelling things I couldn't make out, but eventually he yielded. They didn't arrest him, but they escorted him away from the house, assuring me he wouldn't cause any more trouble. The following weeks were marked by tension. Fear hung over us, silent but constant, like at any moment something could happen again. Still, there were unexpected gestures of kindness. Some neighbors who had previously kept their distance began to come closer. One afternoon, while I was washing the truck out front, an elderly couple stopped by to talk. "We want you to know you're welcome here," the woman said with a warm smile. "That boy has always caused trouble in the neighborhood. Don't worry, no one takes him seriously." Other neighbors also began to change their behavior. Greetings became more frequent, though not everyone was receptive. Some still looked at us with distrust and turned away, but somehow the tension seemed to lessen a bit. On a Saturday, while I was finishing pruning the plants in the yard, I noticed a strange smell. At first, I thought it might be coming from the sewage, maybe a broken pipe, but the odor was different. Strong, penetrating, an unpleasant mix of gasoline and rotten eggs. I started looking for the source. The smell seemed to come from the other side of the wall, which faced an alley between vacant lots. I went out through the side door and walked around. The closer I got, the more intense the smell became, to the point that I covered my nose with my shirt. Then I saw it. A dead chicken, dumped right at the base of the wall. Its feathers were covered in a thick, black, oily substance that reeked terribly. I crouched down to examine it. The substance seemed to have been poured on purpose over the animal, as if someone had done it deliberately. Immediately, I dismissed the idea of coincidence. I looked around, searching for any sign of who might have done it, but the alley was deserted, and the nearby houses were silent. Everything looked so calm that the contrast with what I'd just found was even more unsettling. I went back inside without saying anything. I didn't want Carla or the children to see that scene. Something was very wrong, and it made me restless. I grabbed a shovel and 2 bags to dispose of the chicken. I dug a small hole in a vacant lot near the alley, but it seemed impossible to escape the stench. With every breath, the smell clung to me, soaking into my clothes and skin like something I couldn't shake off. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I sat in the living room, thoughts of the day's images replaying endlessly in my head. And as if that weren't enough, something unexpected happened that same week. I was on the verge of closing an important contract with a coconut exporter, something I had been working on for weeks. It was a great opportunity with significant profit, which we'd been looking forward to for months. Suddenly, everything fell through. The exporter cancelled the contract with no prior notice and no convincing explanation, simply saying they had changed their plans. The news was a heavy blow. We were counting on that money to resolve some pending bills on the house and pay part of the children's school fees in advance. Carla tried to comfort me, saying I'd soon find another client, but something about how it all happened felt off. Shortly after, another situation arose. Carla had been taking care of some pepper plants in the front garden. She spent time and care watering them daily, making sure they got enough light, and she was proud to see the first fruits appear. But suddenly the leaves began to wither. At first we thought it was something simple, maybe the climate or a minor pest. However, the leaves kept shriveling and falling, and the peppers that were sprouting began to rot, turning black and mushy. Carla was devastated. She had cared for those plants so lovingly and couldn't understand what was happening. We tried several solutions, adjusting the watering schedule, checking the soil, but nothing worked. In the end, we had to pull out the plants. The empty patch in the garden seemed to mirror the growing sense of frustration and unease in our home. And then there was the house itself, a place we had built with so much effort and hope, which in recent weeks seemed to have changed. It was hard to explain, but there was something strange. The atmosphere felt heavy, as if the walls carried an invisible tension. Every time I came in after a long day, I felt a discomfort in my stomach, a knot that had never been there before. One afternoon, while I was reviewing some papers in the living room, I heard a high-pitched scream coming from the kitchen. It sounded childish and loud, and my first thought was Samantha. I got up immediately, my heart racing. When I entered the kitchen, I saw Carla standing by the stove, Paolo in her arms, and the other kids sitting at the table. None of them seemed alarmed. "What happened? Who screamed?" I asked, looking at Samantha. She looked at me in surprise, as if she had no idea what I was talking about. "Scream? Me? I didn't scream, Dad," she said calmly, chewing on a piece of tortilla. My wife gave me a wary look, her forehead slightly creased. "No one screamed, Ronaldo. We've been here for a while and nothing happened." I paused for a moment, studying the expressions of everyone around me. "I heard it," I insisted with a conviction I hadn't planned to show. "Someone screamed, I'm sure of it, and it came from right here." Without another word, I went back to the living room, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But deep down, something told me otherwise. The discomfort that had been growing in me over the past weeks felt more present than ever. A few days later, after work, as I was unlocking the gate to park the truck, I saw a neighbor approaching. It was Mr. Joaquim, the oldest man on the street, known for always riding around on his old bicycle. We had exchanged a few words before, but never really talked. "Have you heard, Ronaldo? That boy who sprayed your gate was thrown out of here. Seems they caught him stealing from a little market downtown. The owner saw everything. They said if he comes back here again, he'll be in big trouble." I stood silent for a moment, taking in the information. I felt an immediate sense of relief. Knowing that this troublesome young man was no longer around gave me a tranquility I hadn't felt in weeks. I thanked him for the news as Mr. Joachim got back on his bike and rode off down the street. One night, when the kids were already asleep and my wife had gone to bed, I stayed in the living room reviewing some work papers. I tried to focus, but the strange vibe in the house seemed to make it all harder. It was around 11 when I decided to go outside to check on the truck. I had a habit of ensuring the gate and door were locked before sleeping, but that night it felt almost obligatory to double-check, as if that could prevent something worse. I grabbed my phone and used the flashlight to see my way to the gate. I pushed it lightly just to confirm it was locked. Everything seemed in order. Then I turned to the front door and checked the lock again. The house was completely silent, broken only by the distant chirping of crickets. That's when, looking at the truck parked near the gate, I noticed something. On the passenger seat, seen through the windshield, there was a figure sitting there. The silhouette was dark, with no defined features, but unmistakably human. It wasn't moving, as if it was staring at me. For a moment I couldn't breathe, and my body froze, unable to react. Suddenly the shadow moved. It wasn't a sudden or rushed motion, it simply crouched down slowly, trying to hide behind the dashboard. The terror I felt was suffocating. It wasn't just seeing something unusual, but the certainty that it knew I was there looking at it. I took a deep breath and summoned every ounce of courage to step toward the vehicle. My hand trembled as I grabbed the driver's door handle. It was as if every fiber of my body was begging me to back away. But with effort I opened the door and leaned in to see inside. The passenger seat was empty. There was no one there. Nothing. Just the night silence and my heart pounding in my chest. Using my phone's light, I checked every corner of the interior, from the floor to the back seats, but found nothing unusual. I stayed there, motionless, with the truck door open, trying to understand what I had just witnessed. I was certain I'd seen someone. It was there on the passenger seat, staring right at me. It couldn't have been my imagination. The days that followed brought growing unease. My wife began to fall ill. At first we thought it was just a cold or something she ate, but the symptoms became increasingly alarming. The nausea came on suddenly without warning. Several times she would say she was fine, and in a matter of minutes she'd start vomiting. It was so sudden that she couldn't make it to the bathroom in time. She'd just be there, tears in her eyes, apologizing as she tried to clean up. Early on we tried not to focus too much on it. "It must be something I ate," she'd say, washing her hands or changing her clothes. But as time went on, the episodes became more frequent and more intense. Sometimes the attacks came when she was cooking or taking care of the kids. It was as if something invisible would strike her without warning, leaving her weak and drained. One afternoon, while I was finishing up some yard work, I heard Paolo crying from inside the house. I ran in thinking he'd fallen or hurt himself, but the scene I found made me freeze. My wife was sitting in the living room, holding Paolo in her arms. Her clothes were completely soiled with vomit. The little one was crying uncontrollably, his tiny hands covered in the liquid she hadn't been able to contain. "I'm sorry," she whispered, crying as well. "I couldn't make it to the bathroom in time." Her face was pale, her hands shook as she tried to calm our son, who kept crying inconsolably. I helped her stand up and took Paolo to the kitchen to wash his hands and face, while Carla went to the bathroom to clean up. Even as I was busy caring for him, my mind wouldn't stop replaying what I had just witnessed. I took my wife to the doctor. She underwent numerous tests, but nothing indicated a medical problem. As far as the doctor was concerned, she was perfectly healthy, with no physical explanation for her symptoms. This only heightened my worry. If it wasn't medical, then what was causing it? Carla seemed equally confused. "If there's nothing wrong with me, then why am I going through this?" she asked one night while we lay in bed. A few days later, my mother-in-law showed up at our house carrying a large bag. Since we'd moved, she'd been very attentive, concerned about how we were adapting to the new neighborhood and the climate of the town. But that day there was something different in her expression. She looked serious, almost tense. "I brought this for you," she said, taking out from the bag an image of Our Lady of Guadalupe, framed in wood. It was a beautiful piece, with an almost sacred antique feel. She looked at us firmly as she held up the frame. "I want you to put this in your living room. She will bless the house and protect you." My wife took the frame gently, thanking her. My mother-in-law had always had unshakable faith. Though I didn't share her devotion at the same intensity, I understood how important it was to her and to Carla. We placed the image in the living room on a shelf facing the couch, and my mother-in-law lit a small candle she had brought along. Before leaving, she gave us a solemn look and said, "Ronaldo, you should look for someone who understands these things. There are healers in the municipality who know how to cleanse bad energies." I was at a loss for words. Carla glanced at me briefly, gauging my reaction, but I only nodded, thanking her for her concern. I didn't want to add to her anxiety, but those words echoed in my mind. Although I'd never put faith in such beliefs, I began to question my skepticism. At work, it was common to hear colleagues talking about how they consulted witches or healers for prosperity, business deals, or to ward off bad luck. I always viewed it as superstition, a way for some to deal with life's uncertainties. However, given everything we were experiencing at home, the possibility that there might be something real behind it started to bother me. That night, looking at the image of the Virgin now illuminated by the soft candlelight, my mother-in-law's words echoed again in my mind. Maybe consulting a healer could help. Maybe there was no harm in trying. But at the same time, something in me resisted. I was afraid of discovering that what we were facing was indeed beyond the natural. In the days that followed, things seemed a bit calmer, but soon another new discomfort emerged, so subtle at first that it took me a while to notice. One night, as I was heading to the kids' room to say goodnight, I caught a strange odor. It was foul, subdued yet distinct, reminiscent of spoiled meat. Entering their room, I found the children already tucked in, almost asleep. I went to Samantha first, kissed her forehead, and pulled the blanket up. I did the same with Paolo and Fred. However, the closer I got to them, the more obvious the smell became. It seemed to be coming from them, not their clothes or the room. It was as if it was clinging to them. I moved back, perplexed, and inhaled again. The smell was still there, faint but nauseating, like something decaying nearby. I stood there for a moment, watching them sleep. Their breathing was steady, their faces peaceful, but the odor lingered. Everything that had happened in recent weeks started swirling in my mind. It was as though each little event was connected, suggesting that something unseen was slowly taking over our house. My mother-in-law might have been right, I thought. Maybe it was time to seek someone who understood these things, someone who could help us figure out, and most importantly, stop whatever was going on. Even thinking about it, part of me still resisted. I didn't want to accept that something supernatural might be happening. I didn't want to believe that our home, built with so much effort, was turning into a hostile and strange place. But the truth was, I could no longer ignore it. Something was affecting my family, and the fear of it getting worse felt like a weight on my chest. It was already past 1 in the morning when a sharp noise broke the silence. A loud crash, forceful, like stones being hurled against the gate. Carla woke first, sitting upright in bed and shaking my shoulder. I got up immediately, my heart racing. Another blow sounded, even louder, followed by another and yet another, as if someone was unleashing their anger on the metal gate. The sound reverberated throughout the house, terrifying and deafening. In the next room, the children started crying. Carla jumped up, distressed, trying to comfort them, while I fumbled for my phone to check the security cameras. My hands shook as I opened the app, and the time it took for the image to load felt like an eternity. When it finally appeared, I felt a lump in my throat. There was no one in front of the gate. I held the phone closer, making sure I wasn't seeing things. The live feed showed an empty street, lit only by the yellow glow of the streetlights. But the pounding continued, louder every time, as if something invisible was hammering at the front door. A chill ran through me, leaving my skin cold. "What's happening?" Carla asked, holding Paolo in her arms, while the other two clung to her, frightened. Her voice trembled, her eyes reflecting the same terror I felt. "There's no one outside," I replied, trying to keep calm, though my shaky voice gave me away. She looked at me in disbelief. "How is that possible? We can hear it clearly." I had no idea what to tell her. If no one was outside, then where was the noise coming from? A terrible thought flashed through my mind, making me even more uneasy. What if the sounds weren't coming from outside, but from within? I took a deep breath, trying to push that idea away, and headed to the living room. I looked out the window toward the backyard, hoping to find something that would explain what was going on. The plants stood motionless under the cold moonlight. The wall was intact and the back door was securely locked. Nothing seemed out of place. Suddenly the noises stopped. The silence that followed was so deep I could hear my own unsteady breathing. I stayed there, still by the window, checking my phone again. I switched through the cameras for different angles, looking for any sign, a figure, a movement, even a shadow that might explain the pounding. But there was nothing. The street was still empty, and the gate was perfectly closed. I went back to the bedroom, still trying to process what had just happened. Carla was sitting on the bed with the kids beside her, hugging them. "There's nothing outside," I said, knowing my words wouldn't be enough to reassure her. "Everything's locked. No one got in." That night we decided it would be safer to sleep all together in the same room. We set up a comfortable space on the floor with mattresses and blankets so the kids would be close to us. Any sound, whether the creaking of the walls or a crack from the ceiling, put my body on alert. Although there were no signs of a break-in, the feeling that something was wrong lingered. Exhaustion eventually overcame me, and I fell asleep beside my family. But the fear didn't leave me, not even in my dreams. I relived the banging, the gate rattling violently, and a shadow coming through it, entering the house while I stood powerless. After that night, we realized we could no longer ignore what was happening. The atmosphere in our home was unbearable, and my inability to protect my family from something incomprehensible gnawed at me. That was when I remembered my mother-in-law's words about seeking out a healer. Despite all my skepticism, it was the only option left. Carla found a healer through some acquaintances, a woman of about 50 who lived in a quiet part of town. When we arrived at her home, something about her demeanor reminded me of my mother-in-law. She greeted us with a serene smile and welcoming gestures. Her house was simple but full of life, decorated with plants and religious figures. In one corner stood a small table draped in a white cloth, adorned with lit candles, a glass of water, and a clearly well-worn deck of cards. With a calm voice, she asked us to bring her to our home later that same afternoon. "I need to feel the energies in the place where everything is happening. Only then can I help." Back at our house, the healer observed every detail with a keen eye. She sat in the living room, facing the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe my mother-in-law had given us, and began laying out cards on the table in a sequence that seemed packed with meaning. Carla and I sat close by as she, with steady hands, moved the cards like part of a deeply rooted ritual. The atmosphere, already heavy, seemed to grow denser with every passing second. After a few minutes of silence, she raised her eyes and spoke. "There's a very heavy energy here. This didn't happen by chance. It was done to you. It's someone's doing. A woman." She locked eyes with me as if waiting for me to recognize who she was referring to. "It's someone holding a grudge, someone who doesn't want you to thrive. This energy isn't just in the house, it's in you. It was done to weaken you emotionally, to destabilize you as a family, to take away your peace at home." As she explained, a memory sent a chill down my spine. My mind went straight to the woman I'd seen at that boy's house, the one who had sprayed our gate, his girlfriend. The coldness in her face and her suspicious stare resurfaced with unsettling clarity. It all fit: her age, her connection to him, and her strange attitude that day. My entire body shivered, and the room felt suffocating under the weight of the healer's words. "What can we do?" I asked, feeling fear surge inside me, turning into desperation. She asked us to step out to the backyard while she began the ritual. She lit incense and candles, murmuring prayers in a low tone that was hard to understand. She walked calmly through the house, as if she knew exactly what she was doing. As I watched her, I felt a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this woman could help us get our lives back. It's been almost a year since that night we decided to seek the healer's help. It was a period filled with prayers, rituals and cleanses that initially seemed strange to me, but over time started to transform our home. Slowly, the suffocating tension that seemed to permeate every corner faded, as if a heavy veil was being lifted little by little. The children, previously restless and sometimes frightened, went back to laughing naturally, running around the backyard without fear. Paolo stopped waking up crying at night, and Samantha began sleeping soundly. Carla, in turn, seemed like a new person. The vomiting episodes ended a few weeks after the rituals started. She got her energy back, and seeing the light in her eyes again brought a sense of peace I hadn't realized I was missing. The changes also reached my work. Problems that once seemed impossible began to vanish. New deals were made with surprising ease, and opportunities that once felt out of reach now appeared as if an invisible force had shifted the wind in our favor. Even with all these improvements, I never managed to fully understand what happened. Over the course of the year, I found myself longing for clear answers, something that would explain why our family had been the target of something so malicious. But those answers never came. I presume the woman who harmed us left along with the boy when he was driven out of town. We didn't do anything to provoke them. We just wanted to build our home and live in peace, but for them that was enough to turn us into targets. This experience taught me something hard to accept. Some people harbor bitterness for no apparent reason. No matter how kind or fair you try to be, there are those who need any excuse, no matter how small, to spread their anger. And often that hatred has nothing to do with you but with something broken inside them. You simply become the target of a frustration that isn't yours. Today, when I look at our house, I see much more than walls and a roof. It represents everything we overcame together as a family. Every detail, every corner, holds the memory of what we faced and the strength we found to move forward. The image of Our Lady of Guadalupe remains in the same place, on the living room shelf, and the candle we light every night is a silent reminder of everything we went through. I don't know if it was her protection, the healer's work, or just our determination that helped us get through it all. But I'm immensely grateful. And although there are still things I can't understand, I learned something valuable. There's always a way to move on and protect what we love. Before we move on to the next story, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to get the latest stories. Your presence means a lot, and your support is essential. All right, let's keep going. My name is Anna Clara. My dog, a German Shepherd with a vigilant temperament, always loved resting under my bed. I even prepared a space there for her, with a rug carefully placed, as if it were the perfect little hideout. It was perfectly aligned with the spot where I rested my neck and shoulders while I slept. She was always very protective, and if I got up in the middle of the night, she would immediately follow me, attentive to every move. Even a simple shift in my position on the mattress was enough to make her stir, wagging her tail against the bed frame as if to say, "I'm here keeping watch." About 10 days ago, I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. It was just a few minutes before 4 in the morning, but sleep had completely abandoned me. I lay there motionless, staring at the ceiling, when I heard my dog moving. She was under the bed and seemed to have stood up, pacing back and forth quickly, her paws scratching the floor. At first, I thought she was playing, but then I heard a low growl. She only did that when she was on high alert, as if she sensed something wrong, something out of the ordinary. Suddenly I heard laughter. It didn't come from the door or the window, but from under the bed. My heart nearly stopped. My dog bolted toward the wardrobe, skidding along the way, and hid deep inside. She started letting out low, distressed howls. I froze. I didn't have the courage to look at what was happening. I called her several times, but she didn't come out. She stayed there still, completely ignoring my voice. For hours I lay there listening, trying to pick up any sound that might explain what could be there. But the darkness remained. Only when the sun began to rise did I gather enough courage to peek under the bed. There was nothing there. I tried convincing myself it was all in my head, maybe just exhaustion playing tricks on me. But since that night, my dog hasn't gone back to lying under the bed. Now, whenever she enters the room, she runs straight to the wardrobe and refuses to leave. Since then, something strange has been happening to me. Every night I wake up at exactly the same time, 3:46 in the morning. When it happens, I lie still, overcome by a fear I can't explain. It feels like something is there in the room, but I don't want to give it the slightest chance to confirm it. Sometimes I hear faint taps coming from the base of the bed, just like the ones my dog used to make with her tail. The room is always dark. The wardrobe stays slightly ajar. I don't look at it. I don't have the courage. I'm afraid of what I might see, afraid to confirm what might be lurking deep inside that wardrobe. I don't even call for my dog. I stay in absolute silence. After all, any sound might bring back that laughter that, on that night, came from under the bed. If you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to leave a like. It really makes a difference. Okay, let's continue. My name is Vivian, I'm 19 years old, and I still live with my parents. Last year we moved into a new house, our first owned home, located in a neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The property had been vacant for 4 years before we moved in, and the area was very quiet, with only a few occupied houses. Besides us, there was an elderly couple in house 23 and another family in house 31. The rest of the houses were empty because, according to the management, some legal documents were still missing. The move was slow and we spent weeks organizing everything. One of the rooms remained empty for longer and ended up being used as a temporary storage space. When we finally finished, my mom decided to turn that room into a studio and forbade any kind of clutter in there. Only one box was left, filled with picture frames, 2 with landscapes and 6 with photos of our family. They hadn't been hung yet because the drill had been misplaced during the move, which was basically the only item missing in the house. Without the frames, the walls looked so bare that we kept commenting on it. When we finally managed to hang the frames, something strange started to happen. Every morning when we went downstairs to the living room, we noticed that the frames with family photos were out of place. Curiously, only the family photos, the landscape frames, stayed fixed. The first time we found the frames on the floor, flipped over and leaning against the wall. No one took responsibility, and the event began to repeat every 3 nights, always in the same way. The photos turned to face the wall. This began to intrigue everyone. If the frames had fallen naturally, they would have likely broken or at least made noise, but everything happened in complete silence during the night. Despite the mystery, my mom insisted on hanging them back up every morning, thinking it was some prank by one of us. After a few weeks, she decided to put the photos back in the studio box, annoyed at not understanding what was happening. During a discussion about it, my younger sister suggested hanging the frames higher up, out of her reach. That's when my mom, confused, asked, "What girl?" Maria, our neighbor from house 23, who was with us in the living room, frowned and replied, "The girl I sometimes see at the window of that house," and she pointed toward the front door. My mom followed her gaze and froze when she realized that the house Maria was pointing at was empty. "But Maria, that house has been vacant for years," my mom said, her voice trembling. Maria shrugged as if unsure what to say. "I know, but I've seen her there more than once. I thought you had noticed too." For a few weeks the matter was forgotten, until one afternoon my dad decided to hang the frames higher on the wall, believing this would solve the problem. But the next morning the frames had disappeared. They weren't on the wall or anywhere else in the house, the strangest part. The landscape frames were still there, untouched. Recently, this story resurfaced when new neighbors moved into the house that had been empty across the street. My mum was the first to welcome them. They were still unpacking, unloading boxes, and arranging a table with chairs in the living room. That's when the teenage daughter of the new family appeared at the door, holding our frames, the ones with our family photos. They explained that the frames had been found in the middle of their living room as soon as they moved in. My mum was speechless, trying to explain how that could be possible. The new neighbors decided they wouldn't hang the frames again. In fact, they don't even intend to keep them in the house. Before we get to the last story, if you're still here, let me know what time you're watching in the comments. I love seeing who sticks around until the end. Let's not stop now. On to the next. During a period of my life, my routine consisted of working at night, high up in a massive building located in a corporate area. My shift started at 9 in the evening and ended at 6 in the morning, but that is now in the past. A few weeks ago, I began performing the same tasks, but from my small apartment seated at the dining table. The computer, sent by the office, rests there, transforming that space into my new workplace. A few steps away, there's the living room, a two-seater couch and a simple stand with a medium-sized television. There aren't many things I miss from the old office, perhaps just the air conditioning and the interaction with colleagues. Even though there were few of us, our mealtime conversations often revolved around a fantasy football league we all participated in. Those kinds of nights are behind me now. It was only on my first night working from home that something out of the ordinary happened. It was already past midnight, and my monitor remained inactive. No calls, no logs. The silence was identical to the old office, where we waited for the unexpected, but that night the living room television turned on by itself. There was no sound, just the image. 3 people conversing in a room. At that moment, my computer alerted me to an incoming call. Without paying much attention to the TV, I handled the call, then got up, grabbed the remote, and turned it off. I continued working until the end of my shift. The next night, everything seemed normal. I took calls, prepared reports, and sent emails. Time flew by, but like clockwork, at midnight, the television turned on again, on the same channel. The memory of the previous night came rushing back. My first thought, maybe some alarm or reminder had been set. Remote in hand, I browsed through the settings but found nothing unusual. Before I could think further, another call came in. I spent nearly an hour busy, alternating between calls and waiting. At some point, the TV turned off on its own without me noticing. My shift ended at 6 in the morning and I went to bed as if nothing had happened. On the third night, the pattern repeated, but this time the TV turned on while I was in the middle of a call. As I waited for the client on the line, my eyes drifted to the screen. The remote was right beside me and I wondered, puzzled, why the TV insisted on turning on at exactly the same time. Then something happened. I noticed movement in the background. I lifted my gaze above the monitor, and there it was, a figure sitting on the couch. It was just a silhouette, as if made of shadow or dense smoke. Its face, though indistinct, had a piercing gaze while its skin seemed almost translucent. The client's voice broke through the line again, snapping me out of my trance. Startled, I ended the call abruptly. My heart raced as I tried to process what I had just seen. Without showing any interest in me, the figure turned its back, stood up, and walked toward the television. As it approached, the TV instantly turned off and the silhouette simply vanished before my eyes, as if it had never been there. Since then, I haven't seen that shadow again. However, the television continues to turn on by itself, precisely at midnight, like a clockwork mechanism. The most unsettling detail: the channel that appears always plays the same type of program, ghost stories. What intrigues me even more is how the noises in the neighboring apartment have changed at night. I used to hear footsteps, furniture being dragged, and even muffled voices. Now, there's absolute silence. Once, a neighbor mentioned seeing something strange passing by my apartment window. She even jokingly asked if I had been receiving late-night visitors. Little did she know I often asked myself the same question. In an attempt to uncover the reason behind these events, I decided to access an old file system we used at the office. While reviewing the security logs, I came across a video recorded before my transition to remote work. In it, the building's camera showed the same silhouette I now see on my couch, but this time in the office setting. I froze as I realized it had been there all along, perhaps waiting for me, and somehow it followed me to the apartment. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Click the notification bell to stay updated on all future narrations. I post new videos here every day. I hope to see you in the next one. On the screen now, I'm leaving 2 other great videos I know you'll enjoy. See you there.